Welcome back to State of the Division, this time with UFC 285, which again snuck up on me because I thought it was a week away. We're taking a look at UFC 285, which is a decent card. Again, the early prelims don't offer a whole lot. The prelims have some decent fights. Main card where most of the action is. John Jones makes his return. We've got a nice women's fight, Shevchenko versus Grasso. I expect it'll at least be interesting to watch, even though I think I know what the outcome is. That being said, let's jump right in with the early prelims. Starting us off. Newcomer, 16, 4-1, and reason I had to rewrite this segment, Loic Jaguar Paw Rahad Sabab takes on fellow newcomer, 11-0, Esteban Gringo Ribovics. Ribovics is 2 years younger, an inch or none taller, because Sherdog and UFC can't agree, but does lose 6 in reach. Loic Radazabab looks to be a finisher with 7 KO wins and 5 submission, which leads me to say he seems to be a bit of a rounded fighter. Doesn't seem to have an issue with cardio as well, with a few 5-rounders in his fight history. That being said, that's all I got because he hasn't fought in the UFC before. Ribovics is coming off a Contender Series win, which means nothing stat-wise, and looks to be an absolute finisher with all 11 of the wins coming by submission or KO TKO. Radazabab is the favorite here, and I'm going to agree. Most of that is because his wins come in the PFL, compared to Ribovics, which is a lot of samurai fight and FFC. I don't think Ribovics is bad. I just think that the PFL is similar to the UFC, is closer to the UFC in talent level than samurai and FFC. 12, 4-1. Damon, the Monster, Blackshear, squares off against 9-0 Farid Ferocious Basharat. Basharat is 3 years younger, 4 inches shorter, but only loses 1 in reach. Blackshear is coming off a draw in his first UFC fight where, based on numbers, it looked like he was evenly matched throughout. Overall, he seems to be a bit of a ground fighter with a focus on takedowns and submission, especially with the fact he has 8 in his career. His striking in this fight was abysmal, but he was able to survive. Basharat is coming off a Contender Series win where he thoroughly dominated his opponent. I mean, the man had 9 minutes of ground control, but overall, he's another ground-focused fighter with 5 career submission wins. I want to call him a dominator in style, someone who picks you up, puts you down, and stays on top of you the entire time, but it could be a bit early to do that. Vegas likes Basharat. I'm going to be boring and agree. I think Blackshear could win, but the effectiveness of Basharat's takedown game and the control time gives him the edge in my mind. 14-6, Jessica Penne steps in against the 7-1 Tabitha Baby Shark Ricci. Ricci is 12 years younger at 28, 3 inches shorter, and losing 6 in reach. Jesus. Penne is another ground-focused fighter, rocking a 1.39 takedown average and 8 career submission wins. In almost all of her wins, she does have a takedown and will stack them if given the chance. Her striking is not great, however, with a 2.62 landed to a 4.74 absorbed. She does seem to have a pretty solid chin, however, which kind of helps make up for it. Now, Ricci is very, very similar to Penne. In stats, she also rocks 3.95 takedown average and tends to stack them when given the chance. However, unlike the submission wins of Penne, she seems to be focused on grinding, controlling the fight on the ground, while also having the iffy striking of 2.95 to 4.89. Vegas is going to Ricci, and tentatively, I'm going to agree. All things considered, this looks dead even on the stats, but the 12 years of age stands out to me, and the reach feels less important given the ground-focused nature of both the fighters and their pretty bad striking here, so it feels like reach is not going to matter much in this fight. 10-3, Leomana Manaboy Martinez looks to build a streak against 7-0 Cameron Simon. Simon is 4 years younger at 22, 1 or 2 inches shorter because they can't agree, and loses 3 in reach. Martinez is a striking-focused fighter, rocking a 4.43 to 4.03, and outside the UFC has 8 KO wins. But once again, inside the UFC, he hasn't quite found his power here. So far, the wins he's been able to keep the striking lead and even occasionally get a takedown. However, there's a big issue with his 27% takedown defense. Simon so far has looked like a decently rounded fighter. He rocks a 4.06 to 1.81, so significantly better at not getting hit, and does have 5 career KO wins. Additionally, despite being taken down 5 times and getting 0 takedowns, he has 6 minutes of ground control in his fight with Stephen Kozlow, so he apparently can reverse position or take the top in other ways. Simon is Vegas' pick here, and to be boring again, I'm going to agree. Both fighters like to strike and exchange. It looks like Simon has the power, and on paper, the better striking. Obviously, Martinez could put it away, but we haven't seen his power in the UFC, and he tends to get hit more than Simon does. Ending off our early prelims. 10-0, Ian, the Future Gary, tries to stay perfect against 18-6, Keenan, the Assassin Song. Gary is 7 years younger, 3 inches lead in height and reach. Gary is a striker, and while he does have 2 takedowns in his last 2 fights, it was for a combined minute 20-something of ground control, so not an incredible factor here. With his striking, he rocks a 5.95 to a 4.34, so high octane, tends to be good at it. And while he has 5 KOs outside the UFC, he hasn't really found it in the UFC. He's become more of the point grinder on the feet, and he works it well. Song is similar. He rocks a 4.39 to a 4.37 and likes to live on the feet as seen by the 0 takedown average. I will say that his striking doesn't look to be as clean as Gary's, but he works a similar style of striking. He does have more knockouts in the UFC, but also has lower striking totals in a majority of his fights compared to Gary. In what feels like a can fight, Vegas does like Gary here, and I think that's a pick I agree with, given the simple fact that both fighters like the feet, and Gary has shown that slightly better striking with the higher octane style compared to Song's more drag out and brawl. Starting us off with the prelims. 9-3. Julian, the Cuban Missile Crisis, Marquez, wins weirdest ring name on this card, steps up against the 14-6-0-1, Power Bar, Marc-Andre Barriault, who wins dumbest nickname on this card. Now, Barriault is a year older, an inch shorter, but does take 2 of those in reach. Marquez is a weird fighter. Overall, he's a finisher, 6 KO, TKO wins with 1 in the UFC and 3 submission wins, all of those coming in the UFC. Striking is decent with a 4.81 to a 3.64, and the aforementioned KO power that we've seen. His submission game is also weird given the fact he has 0 takedowns, but seems good at playing from different positions and getting it off the back or getting it out of position. Power Bar also has similar stats, but as a fighter, he seems very different stylistically. He rocks a 5.35 to 4.83, but seems a little sloppier with his striking and oftentimes is able to be corralled and outstruck by a fair number of fighters. Additionally, he's thrown a few takedowns, but they've all been very ineffective as a whole in the UFC. Barriault is the favorite here, and I'm going to disagree. Power Bar is dangerous in potential, but Marquez seems to be more consistent at ending up on the ground to get the submission, but also his striking seems a little bit more, how do I say this exactly, effective with his kind of lurking power and ability at the worst to hang in there. 11-4, Vivi Orejo takes on 10-3, Amanda Ribas. Ribas is 7 years younger, 1 inch shorter, and loses 2 in reach. Orejo is a pretty standard grinder. She's got a 4.82 to a 5.33 in striking and a 2.03 takedown average. She doesn't tend to get the finish and never really does take a striking lead in her fights, instead keeping it close and using takedown time to control and get points. Ribas is a little different, but still kind of comes across as that grinder. She rocks a 4.46 to a 2.57 with a 2.19 takedown average. This kind of originates from her 2 submission wins in the UFC, but as a whole, she seems to take the striking lead and work from there, so I'm going to label her a on-the-feet fighter versus a ground-focused fighter. Vegas is running with Ribas here, but I'm going to take a shot, and I'm going to go with Orejo. Both fighters seem dead even with a 9% takedown defense, and the fact that she can shoot the takedowns on her own. I'm going to lean with Orejo here versus Ribas. 23-8, Derek Blonde Man Brunson looks to get back to winning against 18-2. Driscus still knocks Duplessis. Duplessis is 10 years younger at 29, even height with a single inch going Brunson's way in reach. Brunson is one hell of a powerful fighter and seems to be able to work that in a pretty well-rounded way. He works a 3.50 to 2.84 in striking, with 6 KO wins in the UFC, all backed up by a 3.23 takedown average and the capability to throw submissions every now and then. Certainly not a staple of his game. That being said, his takedowns don't seem to generate in the same amount of ground control time. He had 2 takedowns for 2 minutes in a 3-round fight. Duplessis is another powerful dude, but he does tend to like the finish more. Rocks a 6.62 to a 3.73 striking, and with the aforementioned power to put you to sleep. He also has decent takedown game with 3.18, though it is slightly inflated with a 6 takedown performance against Darren Till. Still Knox is the favorite, and I'm going to agree. I think Brunson can catch him and kill him, but Duplessis looks to be able to keep the trades and dangerous shots to a minimum while getting the points to win, and kind of based on the higher output style, I do like the Swarmers a little bit. Ending off our prelims, 12-5, Cody No Love Garbrandt tries to get back to winning against 13-9-0-1, Trevin 5-Star Jones. Garbrandt is 1 year younger, 1 inch taller, but does lose 5 in reach. Garbrandt's a UFC veteran, and who in his last 2 has run into some issues. He's a very technical striker, uses a lot of head movement and shifting angles with 3.16 to 4.42 in his striking, which, not great. He does have the ability to flash power, but on the same hand, it can and will be used against him at times. His takedown game is functional at best, but never really seems to be the main focus of anything he does. Jones has also been struggling since 2021, but seems to not really excel in anything on the stat sheet. He's a 233 to 496 in his striking, and while occasionally he can pull power, it hasn't shown up. Takedowns have also been relatively ineffective as he's been outclassed in that field multiple times. Garbrandt's the favorite, and I'm going to agree. Jones hasn't been impressive at really anything so far, and I'm going to pick the person who at least excels at one thing versus being someone who doesn't seem to do well in anything. Finally, at the main card, 3-0 Bo Nickel looks to stay perfect against 13-8 Jamie Nightwolf Pickett. Nickel is 7 years younger at 27. It's either even in height or he's an inch shorter because, again, the numbers keep not adding up. But he definitely loses 4 in reach. Nickel's a ground-focused fighter with a dangerous submission game, and that's all I really got. The dude has 3 professional fights, won both of his Contender Series fights by submission in the first. I don't know if there's any valid questions about his cardio, but I do want to raise some about the true strength of his striking given the skewed sample size. Pickett is a struggling fighter who trends towards the grinding style of fighting with a 3.25 to 4.36 in striking and a 1.39 takedown average. He's fairly susceptible to getting finished with 4 of his 6 UFC losses coming that method. Nickel's the favorite. I'm going to ride with him. I'm kind of trusting Vegas here to know better than I do. I don't have a lot to, especially since I don't have a lot to go on. But the fact that they both go to the ground, Nickel is so aggressive with submissions and so seems to be so skilled at them, gives me points in his favor. 21-2, Mateusz Gamer Gamrot, Y, looks to avenge his loss against 13-5 Jalen the Tarantula Turner. Gamrot is 5 years older, 5 inches shorter, and loses 7 in reach. This is just a fight night of big reach differences. Gamrot is a bad man in the octagon who really just fights to win. He has 7 wins by KO TKO, 5 by submission, and 9 by decision, showing that idea off fully. In the UFC, he rocks a 3.26 to 3.34, which makes sense when you realize that his takedown average is a 4.66. Putting that together, he shows a competent striking background, at least capable of keeping him in the fight on the feet, while forcing opponents to adapt to an aggressive takedown game and a general threat by submission he has. Turner's much more of a pure striker with a 6.48 to 4.31, and while he has takedowns, he doesn't use them all that often, preferring to keep it going with that striking. On that note, he tends to work his reach well, in addition to being opportunistic, taking the chances given to him by his opponents. Unsurprisingly, Vegas likes Gamrot, and despite my soft spot for Turner, I'm going to agree. The takedown game of Gamrot is dangerous, and despite Turner's skill, I think Gamrot will get a takedown. I think that'll be where a lot of his points come from, a lot of the damage comes from, and I don't know how well Turner's going to handle that ground game. For 15-4, Jeff Hands of Steel Neal steps into the octagon and ends 16-0 Shavkat Nomad Rakhmonov. Oh, God. Neal is 4 years older, 2 inches shorter in both height and reach. Now, Neal's a great example of the striking grinders in the UFC. He rocks a 5.27 to 5.28 and has the constant threat of finishing opponents with only 1 real KO so far in the UFC. He only seems to finish when he has that incredible striking lead. And when they're able to keep it close and he's not able to get that lead, he tends to fight for the decision. His 2 UFC losses do show that he can be outclassed in both striking and the ground game by certain opponents, but overall seems to be a pretty solid rounded fighter. Rakhmonov is very different. He rocks a 2.54 to 1.39 in striking, but that's really not the focus of his game. That is a 2.31 takedown average and dangerous submission game. Three of his UFC wins coming by submission. It does seem like he wants to be the one controlling the takedowns while avoiding being on his back, though. Rakhmonov is the favorite, and I'm going to agree. I do think that Rakhmonov with the ground game is going to take advantage of that, and Neal might not be able to handle it. I can see this fight not being a finish and going to decision. I just think Rakhmonov is going to be the more aggressive in pursuing the ground, aggressive in going after the takedowns, the pushdowns. And while Neal's striking is dangerous, I don't know how much it's going to play in here. And for the first title fight of the night, we pit the champion, 23-3, Valentina Bullet Shevchenko, against the 15-3, Alexa Grasso. Grasso is in fact 5 years younger, with no other measurable differences between the two fighters. Also, I thought they were both taller than they were. I did not realize both these fighters were 5'5". I thought they were both like 5'7". Shevchenko has been here a while, since 2015, and has been a champion since 2018. She's best described as an all-rounder in the octagon with a 3.19 to 1.90 in striking and the ability to get the finish on the feet. Though with those, she always seems to have severe striking leads. Lauren Murphy was a 98 to 11 striking lead, and that fight ended in the 4th. Her ground game is the major backup to that, and kind of always something she can rely on. She has a takedown average of 2.53 and the present submission threat as well, though her last actual submission win was in 2018. Grasso is more of a grinder if you compare the two. Her striking sits at a 5.14 to 4.02 and allows her to keep pace and many times outpace opponents going into later rounds. Takedowns are only at a 0.44, but she seems very capable of reversing positions or just surviving on the ground to get back to the feet later. She does have a submission game, but it doesn't really seem like she gets the finish with it often. Vegas likes Shevchenko, and I'm going to agree. She looks solid and does possess a skill set capable of working anywhere, and I think that will give her the edge. I do think Grasso could win. I just think more of the odds are tilted in Shevchenko's favor. And now for the main event, the heavyweights. 26-1, 0-1, God. John Bones Jones makes his debut against 11-1, Cyril Bongamian Gan. Gan is in fact 3 years younger, an inch taller, or dead even, and technically the natural heavyweight, though I'm not sure how much that really matters. Jones is moving up and hasn't fought a heavyweight before, that I could find at least, but overall is a well-rounded fighter. 4.30 to 2.2 in striking is the highlight here with a variety of strikes and the ability to pour it on when needed. He does have a takedown game at 1.85, but I feel like it's a situational use versus really a major part of his game plan. Gan, on the other hand, is more of a striker and does it well with a 5.11 to 2.25 in striking and KO power to back it up. His background is kickboxing, so he has some ability to work the leg kick, but tends to go at it with the hands. Does have the ability to shoot takedowns, but has only thrown them against Ngannou once, Rosenstruck twice, and Dante Mays 3 times. Didn't do well against it in his fight with Ngannou, so it may be an issue in this fight. I don't know. Now, Vegas narrowly favors Jones, and I'm going to disagree and run with Gan here. In part, it's the fact Jones hasn't had an official fight at heavyweight and hasn't touched the octagon in a few years. I certainly think he could win. I think he's talented. I think he is, seeing pictures, it looks like his body is looks to be decent at heavyweight. But looking at his last few fights, he didn't look the greatest in them. Sure, he did enough to win, but I'm not sure doing enough to win will be the benefit here. Obviously, you can come out, surprise me, you can come out and prove me wrong. I'm not going to deny that. I just think that you're stepping up in a weight class. You're fighting a fighter who's fought for the interim belt and the actual belt relatively soon. I'm going to tip it to Gan on this note and kind of go with the heavyweight experience and handling this weight better for 5 rounds. So in the end, UFC 285 is an interesting card. I'm not in love with it. I think there'll be some fun fights. I always love heavyweight fights. I do think it is odd that some of the fights are organized they are. It feels weird that Cody Garbrandt's not on the main card. He's in fact on the prelims, and we have Bo Nickel on the main card. I will say, however, that I think there's a lot of guys who have potential. This feels very much like a trial card for a lot of those prelim guys, and I think we can see some possible talents that might become guys in the division soon. Maybe not mainstays, but certainly threats. Overall, I think the main 2 title fights will be interesting. Obviously, Jones-Gan is the highlight. Shevchenko-Grasso should be good. I'm still picking Shevchenko to win. Overall, this is a pretty interesting card. I will say one interesting thing is I don't understand why Sergey Pavlovich is the backup for this main fight. Like, that's just like why. You guys could have had Stipe. That would have made sense. You probably could have put Tuivasa in there. Would have made sense. Derek Lewis would have made sense. It just feels like Sergey Pavlovich is a weird one to put in there because I'm pretty sure he lost recently, if I recall correctly. But overall, 285, it'll be an interesting card. I'm not in love with it. Kind of like the title fights, not much else. Let me know what you think in the comments. Let me know what your predictions are. Let me know if you think I'm completely wrong. See you for the next card.